Cait is the main attraction in this, and so I have signed on to kind of just fill in the gaps and we're just talk wherever I need it. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Cait.
Okay, sorry, slight delay in pressing the buttons. Yes, and I wish we could be in person, but this is kind of an interesting experience to explore here. Okay, so if you came to the previous workshops, we talked a lot about starting seeds and just generally that process. And today we want to cover a little bit more, how do you plant out? What is the process of planting those seedlings out? Or if you are going to do a direct seeding. So that means you're out there by hand broadcasting seed. What does that look like? How do you get ready for that? So I'm going to kind of start from the beginning of at least the process that I think is really important. And so to start, I really think that if you live on it, or around an area where there are native plants, where there's prairie established, keeping a journal and making some observations is a really good first step. So seeing what species are already present on your landscape and kind of what's already going on and working to identify those. So I'd really just, and not only where you live, but also just around in areas. So if you can kind of go to prairies in your area and understand. So I live like in the hills. And so what's going on the farm back up on the hill, you know, is less prairie, and so that's going to be like really different than like a woodland prairie or an open field prairie that you would find somewhere else in a different part of Iowa, for example. So I'm really trying to understand kind of what's here. And the other thing is that when you're establishing a prairie, you want to know bloom times. You want to know like when things are in bloom, when they're growing, what different heights they have. So there's a lot of observations to make because we're talking about a really, really wide diversity, so many different species, so many different plants. The next thing you're going to say is, okay, well, if I don't, you know, where am I going to get seedlings? Where am I going to get seeds? And I'm going to let Lance and Jason sort of chime in here on this, but in general, the best thing is to get a seed source that is as close to your local ecotype or your region as possible. So if you're really looking to establish a native planting, you really want to find seed very close to you. And if you came to workshops in the past, we had a handout. We will be sharing some of this information with you after. We can email it to you. But some vendors or folks that sell seed that we mentioned previously were John Judson of Diversity Farms. We mentioned Custom Seed, Roger Schwery, Ion Exchange, and we also listed Stock Seed Farm. I've purchased some things from them. And then we also had Prairie Moon a little bit further out from us, but those are some great resources. And then the Tallgrass Prairie Center also has a list of local seed dealers, like I think it's by county or, but it's a really great one, and we can also provide you with that link. But what you're thinking and looking for is seed as close to you as possible. It's gonna be more adapted to your area, so we call this regionally adapted seed. And it's going to be more familiar. It's gonna grow better as well in that area. So real quick with that, I'm just gonna ask Jason and Lance if they have anything on seed and seed sources they want to chime in with.
Well, I 100% agree with you that if you, especially if you are doing something that is close by a remnant prairie, it's super important to have local ecotype. So when I say remnant, I mean one that has existed since prior to European settlement. There's lots of reconstructed prairies out there that were not necessarily seeded down with local ecotype seed. And so if you have plants, they might be the same species that would be local here, but the genetics is maybe from Minnesota or something like that. And so if you have that seed, those plant genetics next to a remnant, the remnant plants, then you can get this cross diversity that might cause issues. As far as seed vendors, I, as a USDA partner, I cannot actually, I have to remain neutral and cannot recommend any vendors. However, that said, the link that I'm going to give you guys later does actually have a list of vendors. There's a ton of vendors that are listed on there, basically across the state. And really, what you just ask them is it Iowa Ecotype? And then there is also a program called the Yellow Tag program that is Yellow Tag program. Is that right, Cait? Do you know about this? It's through the Tallgrass Prairie Center, and that is a lot more strict on the genetics of where it came from. They try to trace where all these genetics for these different seeds come from, and it's all tracked. And so when you get a Yellow Tag seed, it is basically, yeah, there we go. Michelle said, yes, Yellow Tag. It's basically guaranteed that it's from Iowa. And another thing to consider is there's Nebraska on the other side of the river, right? So a lot of their suite of species is very similar to ours in Western Iowa. If you're considering where to get seed from, there is more, if you go up or down in latitude, there is significantly more change in genetics than there is if you go east or west. So if you're going to try to get local ecotype seed, but you can't find any immediately close by, at least try to get in the same latitude that you are in. So if you go over into eastern Nebraska and get genetics from there, you're going to be better than going up to Minnesota or whatever. That's all I got. Lance, do you have anything to add on that? Or do you want us to just ignore the fact that you're here, Lance?
I'm going to post a link. So Tallgrass Prairie Center has their local ecotype page. I'm going to post that in the chat. So that gives some maps. It has a map, and so maybe a better idea of what we're talking about in terms of the range of where you want to look. That also lists a few of the seed dealers, but yeah, like Jason said, generally, here in Southwest Iowa, we probably don't, if we can, we probably don't want to get something from Northeast Iowa because it's pretty different, their climate and topography and stuff. So anything closer would generally be better. But I also posted the link to Prairie Moon Nursery because I've bought stuff from them, but they have a lot of good stuff for different supplies and equipment for doing this type of work in addition to the seed. So I would recommend checking out their website, and I also like it because if you find a specific species, then you can find out more about that species, and they even have range maps, so you can see if a certain thing is native to your county. So yeah, I think the Prairie Moon website, at least of the nursery websites that I've seen, has a lot of great information. And I know Cait we used it in one of the previous classes for the germination codes for seed. So they have, I would recommend just checking out the Prairie Moon website. And then I also posted the Tallgrass Prairie Center ecotype webpage.
Yes, so I will jump in. All great info there. I also saw that, Michelle, you posted a Pot County Conservation blog, I think, that has a post about where to get native plants and seeds. So check that out, everybody. And then just on the Prairie Moon train here, this is a guide. It's called Growing Your Prairie from Prairie Moon, and this is awesome. And I really, really recommend this. It's step-by-step, a lot of stuff about direct seeding as well as maintenance. You can print it out. It's really easy, again, called Growing Your Prairie, Establishing a Native Plant Community from Seed. And I love this one. Michelle says the link she posted also has Nebraska seed dealers, so that's great. And then Lance also mentioned this, same on the Prairie Moon website, is this giant document with tons of species, and you can see I have highlighted and written on it because I'm going through this, and I'm looking through the species that I see here on the land where I live. And I'm highlighting those because those are ones that I really want to be collecting seed from and growing out more of. And so this has all of those germination codes. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. If you want to start your own seeds, you need to keep in mind that prairie plants need specific seed treatments, some of them. And that information is going to be found on your seed packet. So again, sorry if you can't, it's okay if you can't see all the details on here, but I just want to give you the idea that on your seed packet, you're going to have codes that tell you what treatment the seeds need. Now, to back up a little bit, I have some plants I brought here. Okay, this is a blue vervain that the seed was collected here where I live and then started out. Now, these plants are usually started November to January. So for those of you that grow vegetables or annuals, the prairie seeds need to be started quite earlier than, you know, that February, March window where we have 8 weeks until the last frost and we get really excited and we start our tomato seeds indoors. So these kinds of things, the process starts like the year before. And I like to make sure people understand that. So that they're grown out enough to place outside when the time comes. So the seed codes on here, some of them you can just go ahead and sow right away in your trays and give them heat and light, but some need a little bit more love. And I'm not going to go a ton into that today because that's what our last classes were about in January. Today we want to talk more about what do you do when you get to this point and you have your seedlings and you're like ready to go. So I am going to talk about my process and a few recommendations. And again, this is for planting out seedlings. Maybe you purchased these from a local vendor or you grew some yourself. And then I'm going to pass it off to Jason to talk a little bit more about direct seeding and kind of how you might go about that and also on a larger scale. So here where I live, I am basically trying to eliminate all of my grass at some point, all of the lawn area. That's one goal that I have here. And so I am creating prairie strips. And I really like to do it in strips because I would just recommend like taking on a space that feels good to you and that is realistic. So instead of like, you know, I mean, please do acres if you have acres and you can go ahead and do that. But I'm working in more of a gardening type way in the lawn type areas here. Obviously we have prairie and pasture in the back, but in the front, I'm doing strips that are about, you know, 4 to 5 feet wide or something like that, and maybe 20 feet long. So that could be one example, or 10 feet long, or 100 feet long. And the first thing that I want to do is I need to terminate that grass, okay? And so my process for that, because I sell a lot of plants and food, is that I don't use synthetic chemicals, but we're going to talk about that too, and that is a route that you can use. But I use a tarping method, and I really prefer silage tarp. Now, silage tarp is white on one side and black on the other side, and that's just going to get the job done faster. But even this time of year, and especially as we're getting warmer, putting a tarp down, making sure it's really secure with like sandbags, and giving it 2 weeks, you're really going to do a great job at terminating that grass and that area. First, you want to mow it, cut it really short. Then you want to tarp it and allow it to terminate. The next step is to use tillage, and there's different ways you can do that. You can do it with a tiller. You can also use something called a broad fork, which I use a lot, but you want to tear out that grass. You want to get all the roots out. We're trying to create like a clean seed bed. If you have weedy plants or whatever, you're trying to eliminate all of that. And that's why I like to do it in strips, because I do a little bit at a time. After I have that grass terminated and I have a really nice area, it's going to depend on your soil type and what's going on. So for those of you living in the city and you might have heavy clay soils, it's okay because these friends will literally grow anywhere once they get established. I promise, their roots are incredible. However, you don't want to, you know, you might need to give that soil a little love, you know, really loosen it. Okay, I'll ask that question in a second, answer that question in a second. See it coming up on the chat. So I would recommend amending your soil if you can with a compost, and then use a pitchfork or broad fork to get it really nice and loose if you can. So kind of loosen the whole area. Again, this is my process. This is what I do. I'm going to pass it to Jason in just a second, but I do want to mention one more thing. When we are planting seedlings, we are trying to mimic nature as much as possible. And so if you can see this sort of pattern here, unlike other ways where you're planting your crops, whatever it is, your tomatoes, your beans, you're planting them nice straight rows all over, that's not really what we're gonna go for our prairie plantings. So we want to plant them sort of off center of each other, and this is kind of one model here. I like to plant them alternating as much as possible. And then I'm not going to go into it right this second, but we're going to talk about heights and mixing species, and that we don't want to create a planting that's just like all one thing all in a row. But first, Jason, if you want to chat about how to prepare a larger site to do a larger planting, and or your recommendations. We had a question in the chat for more invasive grasses or plants, how to terminate those, and potentially what chemical usage could look like in an intentional way, I think.
Sure. So while I'm thinking about it, I will address the chat question. So one of the questions was about Nebraska dealers. I am still a hardcore Iowa boy, so I don't have access to that stuff. But if you are a Nebraska person, every county has a Natural Resources Conservation Service field office or a USDA field office. It's got an office for the NRCS in there. They should all be maintaining a list of vendors that offer services in that county. Again, they can't recommend anybody. So when someone comes into the office and wants to know, hey, where can I buy seed? We give them this piece of paper, say, here you go. And then it is the farmer's duty to go and kind of do the, yeah, there you go. Lance just posted a link to find your local NRCS office. But yeah, you can go in there and get that, or you could probably just call or email them and they could just send it to you. They should have it digitally, I would hope. If you're in the area over in my area of the country, I cover Potawatomi, Harrison, and Shelby County. I'll put my contact information at the end, and you can just email me, and I will send you your county's vendor list. That is not a big deal. Then the other question is, how do you recommend getting rid of larger invasive species? Well, that is a whole separate thing. And I'll just go into a little bit of my talk here, and maybe that'll cover some of that. So I'm going to share my screen. We'll have a little bit of death by PowerPoint, and I apologize for that. This is just full disclosure. This presentation that I have here, it is set up for me just talking, delivering the whole presentation. So instead, Cait is doing, oh dear, what is happening? Oh boy, it's on the wrong screen.
Really quick, while you're doing that, Jason, I'm just going to chime in that
Go
Stock
ahead.
Seed Farms that I mentioned, Stock Seed is actually located in Nebraska, and I have ordered some stuff from them, and so I'm going to recommend, it's just stockseed.com, and you can get in touch with them. They're really, really great about answering your questions as well. So.
All right, I got this figured out now. So again, this is just for me talking. So I'm just going to skip through some of this. This is just about me, but I do want to give a shout out that my position, what I do for a living, one, it's really awesome because I get to just solve problems and fix habitat for people, but it wouldn't be possible without conservation partnerships. And so I want to acknowledge the partnerships that we have. Our primary partner is the USDA, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, but also the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the Les Hills Alliance, which is a area that just focuses on the Luss Hills of Western Iowa, and then local soil and water conservation districts, as well as Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever chapters. Let's see. So when I don't want to dissuade anybody from building prairies, but it does take work, and it's a long process in a lot of cases, and it requires a lot of patience. So this particular landowner, this is in Shelby County, he just had a heck of a time getting this thing to go, and I worked with him for a couple years. It was a lot of panic phone calls with this gentleman, and so we went out and looked at it a few times, and finally he got the product that he was looking for. And for this picture, I said, stand there and look like you're proud of it. And so that's the pose that he did. You guys can see this, right? You can see my presentation, I assume. It's all just black on the sides for me now. So, Cait, can you see it?
I saw it came up for a second, but now it's not there.
Yeah,
Oh no.
I don't see it, but I did.
Oh no, that's no good. Okay, hold on a second then. So if we could see it
There we
now.
go. Yes.
Okay, good. Because I was wondering, because everybody's pictures kind of disappeared there for a little bit. Okay.
Yep.
Well, there's Clint looking at his prairie, all the same. So this is what, and again, I don't want to dissuade anybody from doing this, but oftentimes this is what you want, right? This is the vision, the picture that you have in your head. You want flowers and grass and all that cool stuff, and you can have that, but it's probably going to take time. Definitely more time if you do it from seed. It'll be certainly faster if you do it from plugs that you grow from seed and stick in the ground, and that is definitely the way to do cultivated. But when I am dealing with landowners, we're generally always doing it from seed because it's larger areas and it's just way more economical that way. So this is what you're hoping for, but oftentimes this is kind of what you get, at least for the first year or so, maybe, right? So this, so this previous site, this is a second year reconstruction in Cass County. That looks amazing for a second year seeding. And then this is also a second year seeding that is about a mile away from that previous one. So they were seeded about the same time. And well, we could talk about the problems, the pitfalls later, but just be aware that sometimes it can be an uphill battle, but you can do it. You can do it. So this is my signpost. I'm just going to skip through some of this here real quick, but I just want to talk about having goals. So Cait talked about having a journal and keeping track of things, but also keep in mind, like, think about what you really want to do with your planting. So this is another landowner in Shelby County. This is a 80-acre farm that he manages exclusively for upland game habitat because he likes to hunt it with his kids. So that is his specific goal, and so that will drive how we manage, or how he manages his farm, which might be very different from somebody that wants to do monarch. They want to have habitat for pollinators and monarch butterflies, or somebody had their wife was a photographer and they wanted good backgrounds for senior pictures. I mean, just think about your goals for your planting, and that is going to drive your decision making. The next thing is inventory your resources. What do you have to work with? And the answer is use what you have. And it's not just equipment, the tools at your disposal, but it is your budget. How much area are you talking about? How much time do you have to work on it? Or are you going to hire someone out to do it or whatever? This is a picture from my mom's place. We converted her hay field from, basically it was a degraded hay field, and we're doing a monarch planting. And so I borrowed this equipment. I got the four-wheeler from her boss who runs a dairy, and then I got that harrow from one of the guys that I worked with at the time. The tires are actually from the farm, so those was my own. I did not have to borrow those. But the goal is use what you have. You don't have to be overwhelmed. Just work within your scope. You don't have to do tons of ground if, and oftentimes if you bite off more than you can chew, you are going to be dissuaded from doing any more work. Instead, I usually recommend doing small pieces and then getting comfortable with that. And you can use that as momentum to continue doing larger pieces if you so wish, doing more stuff. Yeah, that's the wisdom of that. So here's actually what Cait wanted me to talk about, doing site preparation. So the first thing I ask when I talk with people is what is out there right now, whether, and keep in mind, I work with farmers quite a bit. So oftentimes the answer is it's crop. And a lot of times it's eroded soil or poorly performing wet areas, or just like odd areas that they don't want to farm anymore. If it's crop ground that is essentially bare dirt with crop stubble over the top of it, well, it's easy because then you just do the seeding. But if it is a fallow area or an area of existing grass, like this is a hayfield that I took a picture of. So if there's a lot of introduced legumes or cool season introduced grass, like smooth brome is one of the main enemies that I have to contend with, then you have to do more work. If it's long grass, like in Kentucky bluegrass, you got to get rid of all that stuff before, because that is all competition that is going to come back and keep your prairie from being nice and pristine, which is the way you want it. Kentucky bluegrass is pretty all right. The silage mat, that is a cool idea, because then you can just roll that thing up and keep reusing it. What a great idea. Good job, Cait, because I'm going to recommend that. I'm stealing that the next time, because I mean, if there are organic ways to do that, typically the way we recommend our site prep is through chemical use. So any organic options that I can come up with that will work for people, the better, because in a lot of cases, or not a lot of cases, but sometimes either they have an organic operation like Cait's place, and so they can't use chemicals, or their neighbors got an organic operation or fruit trees or something like that, and it just does not make herbicide use practical. So we got to find other options. But mostly I'm going to talk about herbicide. And some people get kind of, what do I want to say? They get uneasy when you start talking about herbicide. I am an environmentalist for sure. And I believe in herbicide much in the same way. I mean, I believe in the responsible use of herbicide. I mean, you can definitely overuse herbicides or use the wrong herbicides. But if you follow the labeled rates and do it on the right weather conditions and all that, if you follow the directions, that a lot of people do not follow the directions. But if you do that, you can have very good results, and you can do it in an environmentally sound way. So back to the what's growing there. If there is stuff that's going to compete with your stand, like in this case, there's a lot of smooth brome in this picture in the pasture, or other cool season grasses like Timothy or orchard grass or any of that kind of stuff, or God forbid, reed canary grass, if you have that in there, or perhaps if you have like pampas grass or honeysuckle or any of that kind of stuff, herbicide is going to be your easy way out, because if you do not eradicate that stuff as much as possible, then that's what you're going to get. I've seen a lot of times when the farmer did not do the amount of spraying that they should have, and they seed, $300 an acre worth of seed into the ground, and then they just have a stand that looks just like this. Because it's not the seed that you put in the ground is not going to compete with that perennial vegetation that is already there. One of the other options that I hear people talking about is solarization sometimes. And Cait, I don't know if you've ever experimented with solarization or not, but I have tried to explore that as a, and you can chime in here anytime if you know about it. I've tried to explore that as an option, but I have not heard anybody really succeeding with that if it's not Kentucky bluegrass, I guess. Have you tried solarization, Cait?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. No, so yeah, I'm mostly using tarping to, and again, working on a really small space. And I really like your thought on, again, just taking on the amount of space that's realistic, because it is a lot of work. And also keeping in mind that if it takes a while to establish, so you might give up on the project if you go too big. We are going to do a larger prairie restoration here. And in that case, we're working with brome. And we also have to do quite a bit of tree removal. And in that case, it's far enough away from crops that we will be using herbicide for that project there. So again, just to emphasize I really like this sentence that using organic practices is so important, but the responsible and judicious use of herbicides as an effective tool for native ecosystem establishment is really important. So kind of that point that you're getting across.
Well, you said that way better than I did. So thanks. You made me sound super smart. Um, what is this next slide? Yes, great. So there's a bunch of steps that are involved in doing this kind of preparation. And typically the elevator talk that I have with landowners is that if you're converting from an introduced cool season sod grass, such as smooth brome or some other kind of similar cover, typically you are going to spray twice at a minimum, once in the fall and again in the spring. The full version of this talk is you're going to go out and mow it in August, probably around mid-August, and that is going to get all the standing dead down on the ground. Oh yeah, we'll go back to the solarization thing. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead. So you're going to go mow the cover in mid-August. That will get all the standing dead down on the ground, so that when the cool season grasses go through their second growth period in September, the green growth is going to come up through that thatch. I like this effect. It just comes up like green growth. So that is when you're going to spray it. You will spray typically at the end of September, beginning of October, because it's at that time, after that green growth has come up, that it's going to get cold and the grasses are going to go dormant, and they're going to take that chemical down into the root system, and that is when you're going to get a lot of good mortality. I should probably tell you now that this document that is up on the screen, I'm going to give you a link to this. And this has all these steps in it, so you don't have to memorize this for what I'm talking about. But I'm just giving you the brief 30,000 foot overview. So the fall spraying is absolutely essential to kill these, like especially brome, cool season introduced grasses. And then what's going to happen the next year, so it's going to go through the winter, and then in this next spring, what didn't die from the spray is going to green up, as well as the seed bank is going to germinate. And that's why you want to follow up with a second herbicide application when it gets up 5 to 6 inches, which can vary on the date depending on the conditions of the spring. But you just watch it, and whenever it comes and greens up, then you go out and apply your herbicide again. And you might, if you're lucky, just get away with doing some spot treatment, and that is definitely better. I mean, I always tell people to be as targeted as possible with your herbicide application. Because one, it's cheaper. You save money by saving herbicide. And two, there is no reason to spray that stuff. And it's not environmentally sound to just spray dead weeds. So yeah, then I always tell people to evaluate the stand and see if it requires a third spraying. And then a week after, if it does, then spray it. If it doesn't, then a week, leave it sit for a week, and then do your seeding. I should also say that, well, here, I got a pointer that I learned how to do. So what chemical is it talking about? So glyphosate is what we typically recommend. Glyphosate is the active ingredient that's in products like Roundup. Everybody recognizes the name Roundup, but there is 100 different flavors of that chemical as far as trade names go. So whatever chemical you're interested in using it, I mean, yeah, we could really get nerdy on herbicides, so maybe I'll just leave that for questions potentially. But I'm gonna, when Cait switches back here, I'm gonna drop a link to this, where this website is at, and you can get these documents. This document, as well as another one that I'll probably show you later. And then going back to solarization, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the tarping that you're talking about is actually just depriving the vegetation of light. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Michelle. Keeping photosynthesis from happening. So it's completely shading it out. You can do it with wood or anything that's covering and going to block out the light. Solarization is a practice where you lay down a clear plastic, you seal up the sides, and then it acts as a greenhouse. You do it over the summer months. The sunlight beats down through the clear plastic. The heat cannot escape, so it just builds up, and it basically cooks the soil like an oven, and kills it just bakes the roots, all the rhizomes, and the seed bank all at the same time. The problem is that in Iowa, we don't have strong enough sun, and I have checked on this with the Tallgrass Prairie Center reconstruction people, as well as Iowa State Extension. We don't have a strong enough sun to really heat up the ground deeper than like 4 inches. So if you're talking about, if you have an area of lawn grass where your roots of Kentucky bluegrass, for example, only goes down like 3 or 4 inches, then yeah, solarization might be a good option. Try that out. But if it is an area of like smooth brome, or if it's an area of smooth brome or like reed canary grass or something like that, I mean, those roots go significantly deeper. Like smooth brome is like 16 to 18 inches, I think. So it might kill the seed bank, but those living mature plants are still going to be alive in the soil, and they'll just slowly resprout. They might be knocked back a little bit. In regards to the beneficial soil bacteria, yeah, quite potentially it could. The nice thing about that is, I believe that a lot of that microbiota just kind of goes down in the soil profile, and then it can repopulate once the temperature kicks back. So I've not read any studies on that though. So it does not sterilize the soil. I can tell you that for sure. So, I mean, stuff will grow quite readily. It's not like, for example, if you had like a catastrophic fire that like gets up to thousands of degrees, like that will kill everything that's in the soil, and it's just going to be nothing for years probably. So I've talked enough, Cait. Can I turn it back over to you for a little bit? And I'll give
Yeah,
this
no,
link
that
here.
was awesome. Yeah, thanks. That was really good. So yes, about tarping, the jury is kind of out. So that's a method. Short-term tarping is a method that a lot of organic farmers use, again, to kill that weed seed bed. And it's a great method, and especially with the silage tarp that I mentioned. But yes, you can also use any tarps that you have around. You can use wood. Again, using what you have. I think that's like a great tip always. This is not about like breaking the bank or needing to have a bunch of fancy equipment. So I also know that of some folks that have done this longer term tarping, where they set out their plot, their area that they want to turn into a prairie strip or a prairie garden, and they just like keep that tarp on there the whole entire warm season. So that is another route to go, is to do like a longer term tarping to prep your area and then planting it in the fall. And that's one thing I also wanted to mention, is that as far as planting goes, especially if you're doing plants and transplants, in my experience, planting can happen at any time. What I really like to do, again, back to that observation piece, is I know it's okay to plant different natives based on what I see popping up. So some of the things I can plant out quite early because they're already coming out, like the Monardas. They come up quite early in the spring. It's still like pretty cold outside and I'm not planting a lot of other stuff out, but I'm seeing them already in nature, like here on this land coming up. So I know that like they're okay to already start setting out. In general, a lot of the native plants that I grow, I have them in various containers, like growing all summer long. They're getting bigger and bigger, and some of them wait until the fall, and I don't get them in the ground until the fall. So for those of you that are like wanting to start this year, now is a great time for planting. Throughout the summer is a great time for planting. Fall is a great time for planting. So you have a lot of time to do that. One thing that I'm going to try that kind of piggybacks off of what Jason was talking about, again, back to direct sowing and how do we prepare our site and using herbicides and things like that. I have a strip that I have like many different projects going on, but I have a strip, and one thing I'm going to try this fall is I have a lot of invasive plants in this strip, and so I want to spray it. And then I'm going to actually sow oats. So I'm going to use cover crops as a way to create a stand of plants that's going to die with the frost and then create this kind of like living mulch that I can seed into. Now, I have never done this before, but I'm just using it as an example and something I've read into, is that you can sow oats kind of like August, September, and let them have a really nice stand. And then when they frost and die, then I can kind of rake that around and I can go ahead and do my seeding. I can do like a early winter, late fall seeding. And so that's something I'm going to try, again, kind of just using a different technique to get things established. When we're talking about your choice of, am I going to direct seed or am I going to use plants or transplants, there's different benefits, right? So we're talking about how like it takes a while, and I'm going to go through this quickly because I really think we need to talk about maintenance. That's such an important piece when you're establishing a prairie strip. But one of the benefits of using seedlings is quicker establishment, right? You have these plants, they're more grown out. They're going to grow quickly. They're going to fill in quickly. So I have a strip that I'm working with right now that's on year 2, and I will tell you a little bit about what I'm doing right now. Again, I planted on this zigzag type pattern, and I'm really working with different species and interspersing them. So like, let's say if I'm going to do some retibitas here, then maybe up here I'm also going to put retibita. And then maybe if these are going to be like some side oats grama or different types of grasses, then I'm going to replicate that here again down here, if that makes sense. So, and kind of thinking about like mimicking like what plants work together. There's a lot of resources online actually that I've read through that will give you like lists of plants that kind of commonly group together. And so I'll also share those out. But a benefit of seedlings is that quicker establishment. I do use a little bit of mulching in the beginning, but when you plant, you want to plant dense, 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 okay? Very densely. So like I'm usually planting 4 inches apart. The furthest apart that I plant is a foot, pretty much ever. So my seedlings are gonna be planted like really, really close, quite close together. I'm trying to create that canopy so that the plants will grow out and they'll cover, and then it's just gonna be a mat. I'm not gonna have to worry about mulching or things like that. On my strip that's in its 2nd year right now, I am hand weeding. So that's another thing to think about with your, like what you can and can't do and things like that. Like I'm totally okay getting out there in between the different plants and like digging out the stuff that I don't want in that prairie strip. So those plants have more space and they can fill in. Another thing that I'm noticing that I'm doing is as the plants get established, I might move things around a little bit. I might dig some things up and I might be like, okay, there's not a lot of this over here. So I'm going to gently dig these ones up and then I'm going to place those over there so they can fill in a little bit more. So I'm tweaking or adjusting, I guess, the area is something I'm also noticing that I'm doing. I just want to go back really quick though to this idea of planting densely. So it might be even more so than like you plant other things, but you're really wanting them to fill in as much as possible. One other thing, mapping your plants out ahead of time. I really recommend that. Creating a drawing or creating a map. And then I do water when I plant for establishment. So I am watering, like right now I had some, let's see, some different Monardas and things like that that I've put out there. They're pretty small, so I'm giving them a little drink of water kind of just at the beginning. But in general, this isn't something that you need to hand water or put on soaker hoses or have a sprinkler over or anything like that. Like these plants are very hardy and drought tolerant, very hard to kill them, and they will establish pretty well. So there's not a ton of maintenance. However, if you are seeding a small or large area or whatever, there are some key maintenance techniques, mowing being one of those. And I'm not super well versed, so Jason, again, I'm gonna pass it off to you to talk about mowing, but you have to mow. And it's hard, but it's so important because these plants need to focus on root development and root growth. And so when you seed in the first few years, you're going to spend a lot of time actually mowing that area. It's going to increase the vigor of that stand. So Jason, are you down to kind of talk a little bit about mowing technique?
Sure, I could talk about mowing. I love mowing. I forgot that I had this slide, so I'm going to go back. We're going to go back to this to the prep here real quick because I want to show this here. Okay, so this is going back to my mom's farm again. So the back picture that is the large one is the day that the guy came and seeded it. And then the inset picture is the before, basically, picture. So it was a degraded hayfield. If you know anything about hay, you look at this and you're like, yuck. It's basically all foxtail, essentially. Foxtail with a little bit of brome and some timothy and maybe like 5 red clover plants in the whole thing, probably. So I just want to walk through kind of what I did. So I sprayed this whole field. She was renting it to a guy that was haying it, so had him hay it in like August, mid-August. Like I said, if you mow it in mid-August, so I had him go and hay it one last time, get the bales off of it. Then I went and sprayed it in late September. I think it was maybe the first week of October. Went and I sprayed it with a glyphosate product, some kind of off-the-shelf thing at Baumgars or whatever. So I just pulled a little hand sprayer that I had, was a little teeny boom sprayer with like 5 nozzles behind that 4-wheeler that I showed you that I borrowed from someone. I borrowed the sprayer as well. So I drove it back and forth, sprayed it, and I thought it was under applying. I followed the labeled rate and I felt that I was not putting enough chemical on, but I said, no, I'm going to trust the directions and see how it rides out. And about a month later, it was completely all brown. It had killed all that deader than a hammer. So then the next year, spring rolled around and I sprayed it one more time when it greened up. And then I burned it off. So I got some friends and my wife, and we went over there and we set fire to it. So we burned off all that thatch, everything that was dead. And then I just kind of waited to see what else was coming up. And mostly it was just kind of annual junk, which we'll get into. That is a perfect segue into the mowing, actually. And then I ran a harrow over the top of it to loosen up the soil, because the vendor that I had them broadcast it. So what Cait, all the stuff that Cait was talking about was exactly correct. All those same guidelines apply no matter the size of the planting that you're doing. I mean, you want it dense, but you also want each plant to have its own space, if at all possible. I'll kind of get, I'll talk about the different seeding stuff here in a little bit, but um, yeah, so the whole idea is maximizing seed to soil contact. That's why that's why I harrowed this. So then they just drove over it with they drove over it with a Vicon spreader, which is a big drum on the back of it's a big cone spreader that is on the back of a tractor. This drove right over it. It was actually John Judson that seeded it. So Cait recommended John Judson previously, and John is we've known John for a long time, and so that's who I had come and do it for us. Was this? Yes, talking about seeding. So I just want to mention species composition. It all ties back into goals, right? So if your seed mix or plant composition, whatever species you choose to put in your planting, should reflect your goals. So if you want, like if you want pheasants, for example, you probably are going to want a lot of grass, a lot of tall grass, most likely, and that is going to be very different from if you want honeybees or if you want monarch butterflies. So in that case, you want to have more milkweeds. So every one of these projects is different as far as the resources that the people have available, how much money they have, what their goals are. So I'm just trying to give kind of broad swaths of information here. But if you have more specific questions, we can definitely get nerdy and get in on that. So touching on seeding.
Can
So
I chime in just real quick, Jason?
Well, yeah, of course you can.
Okay, one thing I want to say is the goal. I love this goal thing. I think it's so important because everybody has different goals, and you might be like, well, I just want a prairie. Doesn't everybody want a prairie? But like, as you're even talking, Jason, I'm like, oh yeah. Okay, so my goals, for example, and these aren't anyone else's, but I really want to attract pollinators. That's super important. I have a lot of goals, but one is like mimicking what's here already on this like little what I believe to be a remnant that is still remaining here. That's important to me. Number two is really important to me is pollination because I grow food crops and I need adequate pollination. So I'm really wanting to track pollinators. And then number three is that I actually harvest the leaf of a lot of prairie plants that are also medicinal. So I know that I'm going to have bigger stands of those things, or like I'm wanting to bring those plants in a lot. So I just love the goals thing. Really think through what it is that like motivates you and like what you're trying to accomplish. I think that's spot on. Just wanted to chime in with some of my goals.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, yes, goals very underrated. But it's like it's like the mission statement for your prairie, what you want to accomplish with it, so that when you have when you have goals or vision statement or whatever you want to call it, um, when you are making decisions, you can ask yourself, does this course of action go towards the goal? If no, don't do it. Do something else. So super important. Super important, but often overlooked. So when you're seeding, so the backstory of this picture, this is a brome stand, brome and other, it's an old pasture. So this producer, he wanted to convert this to monarch habitat. So this is the same situation. He sprayed it in the fall. This is a couple springs ago, I want to say this picture was. So he sprayed it in the fall. He sprayed it again in the spring. He sprayed it a third time, actually. You can see there is a ton of thatch here now because all that regrowth, it regrows, they spray it, it lays down, it regrows, it spray it, lays down. And so there's a ton of thatch on the ground, all that dead. And so in this case, he is using a drill. I don't know how familiar people are. A lot of people don't know really what drills are, but this is a native seed drill. Basically what it does is it has these cutting wheels on the front. You can't see it. It has cutting wheels on the front and it cuts through that thatch like a knife. And then in the middle where these little kind of, let me see here. So these tubes here, that is coming from the seed box. The seeds fall down that. This is the main box where all the seed is. It's holding it, so it's falling down the tube. It's falling in this little trough. So you can see these lines. That is the knife cut. Then the seed falls down in that furrow. And then all these wheels on the back, these are press wheels, and that presses the seed down into the soil. Seed to soil contact, that's the name of the game. Because without it, the plant is not, or the seed is not going to germinate. So in this case, I was helping him set up the drill. So he was running it forward like 20 feet. And then we were looking to see how deep the furrow was, because they can be kind of finicky sometimes. If you drill it too deep, the plants won't germinate, because basically native plants need to be on the surface to germinate. Whereas a lot of farmers treat it like crop, where you plant corn and soybeans like an inch deep or more. So it's very different. So full service in the regards of going out and helping people be successful with these plantings. But if you were to broadcast this, for example, so like Cait, you were talking about probably broadcasting your seeding, right? You do all your site prep, get rid of however you do your termination. And when I say broadcast, either you're doing it in a large, I should have got a picture of a Vicon spreader, but so you can do it by a machine that's throwing out all the seed for you. It's this little oscillating thing that goes like this, and it just has this big fan like 30 feet wide of seed spray. Or you can just do it by hand. I mean, there's all in between. Like they make those little shakers that you can just shake in your lawn, or has a little crank on it or whatever. That's all broadcast seeding. So there's differences in cost benefit of what you do. So with a drill, you're maximizing your seed to soil contact, but all of your seeds are right next to each other in those furrows. And so what can happen is the more, the more competitive, aggressive species will germinate quickly, and they'll send up they'll start growing, whereas the more conservative species might be slower. And so in a lot of cases, you get less diversity when you drill, especially if you have like a super diverse mix. It's oftentimes better to broadcast, because then you're just randomly throwing the seeds out there, and every seed gets its own little space, which you can think of as a chance to establish. So yeah, but with broadcasting, the seed is going to just be wherever it lands. So you have to try to get it down to the soil some kind of way. And so you can do that either by doing it in the fall, like mid-November or whatever, so it's ahead of the snow. So this freeze thaw and the snow melt, the snow and melt cycles can work the soil, or work the oh, excellent, thanks, Lance. Actually, I'll just pull this baby up here. So the so the seed could get worked down. So yeah, so it's a brand Vicon spreader. Oh, what's going on? So yeah, it just throws the seed out the back of that bin as it's going along. This is a golf course, not a native prairie, but whatever. Lance, what have you done to us? I'm going to close this. Well, now can I get back to my presentation?
I'm really low tech, and so for my seed for broadcasting, I just broadcast by hand. I mix my seed in a bucket with some moist sawdust. That's just a practice I learned or use. And then yeah, just using your hand and watching and going slowly, I think is really important if you are seeding by hand, to make sure that you're really getting good coverage. And then also, I think it's good to do like a light raking. And I think that's usually for summer. If I understand that, it's best to do that kind of for like summer plantings. It's not necessary if you're doing frost seedings. So that would be times when we don't have snow, but we have frost. It's winter seedings. Obviously, you're not going to be out there like raking. But yeah, there's lots of tech here, I guess, like a full spectrum of different tools. And also I'm really into it and can nerd out about all of it too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's right. If you were to see this in the spring or early summer, this stand, if you were going to broadcast it, you need to work the seeds down through the thatch some kind of way. So if you say raking in a small scale, perhaps, or if it's a larger scale, you want to drive over it with like a roller basket or a cultipacker or some kind of equipment like that, just to work it down through the sod. Um, Again, like this little piece that he did was only like 4 acres, I want to say, which in the grand scheme of things, and that might be way bigger than what you might be thinking, or it might be less. I don't know. I mean, it's every little bit of habitat helps. So don't think that like, oh, it needs to be big or else it's not valuable. Well, that's absolutely not true. I could totally get into that about the need for small native plantings for butterflies, specifically for like monarch butterflies. Like they have been shown to use small patches in urban settings almost as well as they do large in out in like the country or whatever. Either way, though, you could hand seed this little piece. You just got to be methodical about it. You just divide up and do the exact same thing that Cait was talking about. You divide it up, maybe stick some flags in the ground to create a grid pattern, and then just divide your seed into sections. So if you divide your field up into 5 sections or whatever's manageable, and then divide your seed up and then just fill your bucket, put the soil in there, mix it, and then just put all that on that section and then refill it and just keep doing it. Just do it systematically. And it can work really well. I've had people do like 10, 15 acres by hand, and I thought they were crazy, but hey, good on them for doing it. Um, okay. Establishment mowing. So this is back to my my bad picture, right? Like the my example of the expectations. So what happens when you terminate all of your existing growth, all your grass or current cover or whatever, uh, the you put your native seed down, and all of those are perennial plants, and they're all dry adapted. And so the name of the game for those plants, for their survival, is to get to the water. So the first thing that they do is start putting down root growth. So they will do if not all of their growth below ground for the first 1 or 2 years probably, and they barely do anything typically above ground. I mean, it might only get that tall maybe, or you won't even be able to see it hardly, but they're there. It depends on the species, of course. Everything has its own growth form, but by far and large, native perennials would do root growth first. So they don't really do anything above ground for that first year especially. But what does grow is annual, we call them weeds, annual plants. Right, Michelle, a weed is only that which is out of place. So in this case, in this picture here, pretty much everything you see there is mare's tail, which is it's an annual weed that is super common in crop fields. It is everywhere basically. There's also Canada thistle in there, but we're not going to talk about that. That's a separate issue. But so for that first year, maintenance mowing is super important, because the annual weeds are going to come up. And this is like 6 feet tall, 6 to 8 feet tall, I want to say, is what this is. The landowner did not mow this. So I was taking a picture because I was like, oh yeah, this is good stuff for what not to do. So the annual weeds will come up and they will soak up all of the light for those seedlings. And so basically there's no light that gets down to the seedlings, and then the seed can fail. To get around that, you mow. And when we say mowing, I don't mean with a lawnmower. You want to mow much higher than that. So typically when I am dealing with people, they are using like a big batwing mower that's 15 or 30 feet wide. So they mow. Typically what I tell people is when the weeds or all the plants get up to knee or mid thigh high, or if you can't see your boots on the ground, that means that the light is not getting to the dirt, and so it's not getting to the seedlings, so it's time to mow. So then you go out, you mow it so it gets down to 8 inches ish, somewhere in there, 8 to 10 inches. You don't want to mow too low because those seedlings are coming up and you don't want to damage them if you can. So you got to hit that sweet spot where it's just above the native seedlings, high enough to not impact them, but low enough that you're cutting off the annual weeds. So we typically say, 8 inches, something like that. So if that means if you have like big equipment that you can go and mow, or if you know somebody that's got one, great, use that. You can also use a weed whip or like a metal fixed blade attachment on a weed whip. So just go out there. Basically, it's just limiting the competition from those annual weeds so they don't shade out your natives. Let's see what my next slide is. Yeah, so this is the second iteration of I put the first link in there, and what I'll do here is I'm going to close this baby out. But this handout, it talks all about establishment. So either you mow, like I said, first year mow often, and then the second year you might need to mow a little bit more, but by then your perennial vegetation, the natives are going to start taking off. This document also talks about burning as well as weed, like noxious weed control, like Canada thistle, other bad stuff. So I'm going to put this. So this, you can search for, this is the Iowa Natural Resource Conservation Service website. I can put the link in there, or you can just search for NRCS Iowa biology, and this will come up. And there's a bunch of good stuff on here. This is that vendor list that I was talking about. So this is the vendor list for Iowa that NRCS maintains, that top link. Down here, there are 4 of these documents, these guides. One is for planning into cool season sod. That's the one I showed you before. And then the establishment and management one. And then there's also planning into corn stubble. And then this one is brand new that we helped do. It's increasing diversity in already established native reconstructions. So, but there's lots of good information on the website. I highly recommend you check it out. So mowing is super important. And if you are, if you want the best diversity you can get, then mowing is absolutely important. Plus, it makes it establish much faster, so that you could cut down on your maintenance down the road. That's
Yeah.
my spiel
Cool.
on mowing.
Awesome. I'm gonna jump in. Is that okay?
Nope, it's all you now. You're good to go.
All right. Okay, so we talked about mowing. Obviously, if you're planting seedlings, I'm not out there doing any mowing, but I do just want to emphasize that with planting seedlings and planting densely, again, the goal is that they're going to get established and they're going to outcompete and create that canopy or that cover over the soil, so you're not having those weeds. But yes, you will have to go out there and pull some of those weeds at the root. So I do a little bit of spot weeding here and there. That's really important, because as the native planting is established, I don't want any chemical usage. At that point, there's no reason for that. I don't want that to happen. I don't need to use it. So I think it's just really important, especially like I do have some Canada thistle here. That's one that I really want to keep on top of and make sure that I'm getting rid of that one. After the first 3 years or so, burning is also a really, really good practice for your prairie areas. I've read it's single-handedly one of the best maintenance techniques, but again, just for the bigger of those species, and doing a controlled burn is kind of like a whole other workshop. And there's a lot that goes into it, but it's definitely a great practice for the continued maintenance of your prairie area that you're establishing. It's 8:16 right now, so I did want to give us some time, and again, Lance, you're the moderator, but I did want to make sure that we could maybe hone in on some of those more specific questions that folks are having right now. I didn't get a chance to talk about seed collecting or saving from your prairie that you're establishing. Maybe that's an additional workshop that we kind of do. But how does everyone feel about taking some questions at this time? Thumbs up.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I will say that Golden Hills last year did some seed harvesting events, and we hope to do that this year, but who knows with having groups, I don't know what that's going to look like. But maybe it will be kind of a virtual thing and then train people to go out on their own. But yeah, so the idea for that is to harvest local prairie species. A lot of the seed that we got was used by county conservation boards and the DNR on their properties, but what I would like to do is expand that to include maybe do like some seed, sales of local wildflowers and grasses, and then continue the partnership with Iowa Western, hopefully where we can still grow some plants and do a native plant sale for the people that want to just buy a few plants and aren't really doing a larger scale restoration. So again, just follow the Golden Hills website, Facebook. As soon as we have information, we'll post it there. But like I said, with the COVID stuff, we just don't really know yet what events might look like. But we're planning to do seed harvest in some form, so that would be a good opportunity. And right now, what I've been working on is a huge spreadsheet. It's like almost 500 species, I think, and trying to narrow down which ones we want to target for this year. So that just kind of gives you an example of how many prairie species there are. But there's a lot out there to get, and so we're trying to figure out what ones we actually want to harvest this year. So just stay tuned for that, I guess.
I also want to quickly show this guide. This is amazing. Prairie seeding and seeding evaluation guide. And I use this a lot. It has amazing pictures of all different species in it. It even shows you the seed, what to look for, and it also has when it flowers, what type of prairie it usually grows in. So this is one that I just like really use as kind of my go-to when I'm doing research on different species I want to learn more about, how tall they get. All of that info is in here. And then another one, and also plug to Iowa Prairie Network. Go and follow them on Facebook, social media, all those things. But this is Going Native, which is a really, again, awesome guide that covers a lot of stuff that we talked about in this workshop this evening, and it's just adorable, and everyone should have a copy of this. I think, great guides. So, okay, do we have any questions in the chat, or if people want to like unmute? Okay, where can we find the prairie, this guide? Well, I'm gonna let Jason Jason mentioned earlier having copies available, or?
I do have copies, or you can get them yourself. So that is published by the Iowa Living Roadway Trust Fund. I will put the link right here. So you can request them yourself. It's grant funded, where they have a bunch of those very similar guides like that. They also have super cool prairie posters that they can send you a set of them. I believe that is on the website as well. So you can also, the pollinator book is probably, I get a bunch of these all the time when I do outreach events. So these guides, I always have them out on the table and I give them away. So you can just order them. I believe they are free. Yep, everything is still free. So just get them. They're great.
Free, get one of these. They're awesome. Oh, Hitchcock Nature Center gives them away. Awesome.
And Lance just posted another link here. I'll come in here and I'll share my screen again. Sorry if that's getting obnoxious to you guys. Okay, so this is the link that Lance just posted. So this is the Tallgrass Prairie Center, University of Northern Iowa website. So there's 10 of these documents. So these are handouts. They're big, like 11 by 17, I think is what they print out, but you could print them out on smaller paper. Maybe they're not that big. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, there is a ton of information that is just packed into each one of these, and there's 10 of them. So it has these fantastic
Mhm.
tables which talk about when things are ready to seed collect. Basically, oh, I'm losing my thing here. Oh my God, I can't see because the thing is in the way. Well, when I mouse up to change my tabs, the Zoom like banner comes down and so it hides my mouse. Okay, so each one of these 10 handouts is basically a super condensed handout that is taken from their prairie restoration manual, which I believe is this link right here. This is a fantastic book if you are really interested in prairie restoration. Professional prairie reconstruction biologists use this book. So it talks about everything you ever wanted to know about prairie reconstruction. It is fantastic. But anyway, if you want the cliff notes of that book, these handouts are that. So you can just kind of go in here and just buffet style pick out the pieces that are interested to you. Yeah, just either download them, print them, whatever. They're available for free. You can not necessarily order them, I don't think. I think they're out of them, but they used to provide those for free. I don't think, last I knew, they did not have a reprinting of these just yet. They're waiting to do that again, but there are resources out there. While we're still talking about that, the Xerxes Society, as well as the Monarch Joint Venture, also have fantastic handouts if you are interested. I am a butterfly nerd, so I really geek out to doing pollinator plantings. So these are fantastic fact sheets for that. So they really drill down into what kind of nectar value is good for different pollinators and blooming period and all that kind of stuff. So, and they are all free as well. You can just go search for Xerxes Society or Monarch Joint Venture, and you can get those as well if you just look on the material, look for their materials that they have available. Stop talking now. Cait, you can talk. Did anybody have any questions?
Yeah,
We
are there
cover-
any pressing questions about your plantings that you are trying to do this season right now?
I can't type fast enough, so can I just say it out loud?
Yes, please. Yes, yes, yes.
I started a prairie planting before I knew what I was doing, and started with the grass seed mixture, and now I'm slowly adding a plant here and there. So I know it's going to take a while for anything to look right, but the mowing, I've been having my husband mow it just with his, we just have a tractor mower, so it mows pretty low. And I don't know if we want to do that every year, because it's kind of a mishmash of things right now. So it's really hard to, if you have any, the thing is, I need that the direction and the goal setting. I realized that's part of my problem. I haven't actually done that, but once you have something going, it's hard to just start over, from a
Sure. It's a whole sunk cost fallacy from economics class, I think, actually. That is a great segue. So here, I'll share my screen again. So my, this is just my contact information. So I would invite you to email me and we can just have a phone conversation and we can really talk specifically about, because again, every project is different and what your prairie needs might be very different from what somebody else's needs. But typically in any kind of disturbance, whether it's mowing or fire or whatever, you want to do it with a reason. You want to do it with a purpose, and that purpose should have something to do with fostering the plants that you want out there, the desirable plants. So if you're mowing, you want to mow to foster the seedlings. Repeated mowing, like especially if it's low, is going to foster undesirable stuff. So like barnyard grass or Kentucky bluegrass also does very well in a low mowing situation. So you want to minimize the amount of mowing. Yeah, you can. Yes, you can totally still do it. I am equal opportunity as far as all that goes. But yeah, I mean, and you might be able to just get away if you have an area of grass. If it's native grass, you might be able to just do some disturbance, like just burn it with fire. I mean, burn it with fire, and then throw some wildflower seeds out there, and then in that way, it can, the plants aren't going to grow if the seeds aren't out there. So if you just want to strew some out there, that can work. Um, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I would chime in and say that would be the same thing if you're looking for more diversity. You have these grasses coming up, you also have weeds, burning it and then seeding in more of what you're looking for. I think that might be a great thing to try. One thing I also is like, I know right now, especially people not meeting up and everyone staying home and staying safe. But something that really helps me is also just having a different set of eyes on like the projects I'm trying to do, or just having someone out to kind of look at it and say, okay, here's what I'm trying to do. I want more flowers. I want more blooming things. I've got a lot of grasses going on. What would you do? So that also can be really helpful, just having someone to come out and walk the land or walk the prairie with you. To give some kind of ideas and tips. That's a lot of how I learn. I learn a lot by doing and a lot by this, like, support from other naturalists, farmers, conservationists kind of coming out and making suggestions. And then I try something and I see what happens.
Does anybody else have any more questions or anything that we didn't cover that we should have? We covered a ton of mileage, I feel like. So if it's overwhelming, don't feel bad. A lot of what I talked about is covered in those. It's more organized and more well said in those handouts that I linked to. So if you're interested in that, check those out. They're reflective of what I said because Pheasants Forever helped to develop those, and I was on the committee that helped to do that. So yeah, self-promotion.
Really quick, I can kind of show some of these seedlings that I brought. This is Monarda fistulosa, and we also have yarrow, Achillea millefolium. So I kind of wanted to give, this is Echinacea species. I wanted to give an idea of, these were actually started in January, a lot of these, that's when they were actually seeded. And also they grew in a greenhouse that was like barely heated. So started indoors with heat mats. And then when it was warm enough to actually put them in the greenhouse. So these are things you can do from home. But this is about the size that they are right now. Now, if they would have been in like a heated greenhouse, they'd probably be a lot bigger. Right now, they would have had more heat, but you don't need a lot of high-tech things to get some of these going at home.
Lance,
and the other thing I wanted to mention is also when you plant these out, like in the first year of these, they will get really like a really good size. And then even in year 2, I would say in year 2, the maintenance, when things really fill in, it's just such low maintenance as well, like no need for really watering at all. They're established, their roots are established. And so that's something that's really wonderful versus annuals and all the other things that are a little bit more, they're the high maintenance plants. They need a lot more love.
Lance, you're recording, are you going to make this available for review if people want to?
Yeah, so I think the way it works is that since Lisa at Iowa Western set this up, I think she will get the email and then she can forward it on to me and I can send it out. And then we also will have, we can share this Google Doc that has a bunch of links, and I'll add the links that are in the chat also to that. So yeah, there'll be a video and then we'll have a bunch of resources too.
I'm curious, real quick, does anyone have any questions about like specific species or things they've tried? One thing I'm adding is rattlesnake master. I'm adding some of that in this year. I'm really excited about that. Lance, you want to wrap us up? Oh, I bought a small acreage. If you're learning how to think for invasive species. Uh-oh. Let's see. Let's see if I didn't get that. I would, oh, let's see.
So in regards to the invasive species, unfortunately, like with honeysuckle, we planted that for conservation purposes. Back in the 40s, they decided that they made great windbreaks, and so they planted a ton of them, and then they were really aggressive, and now you'd be hard pressed to find a woodland in Iowa that is not filled with honeysuckle. So it's an uphill battle. Any invasive species is an uphill battle, and really it is just brute force treatment. And most of them have some kind of different strategy for doing that. So my recommendations, I have tons of recommendations for invasive species management, but since it won't apply to anybody like it might not be broadly applicable. So I invite you to just email me, and I can give you some tailored advice specifically for your place. I'd be happy to do that. That's no problem.
Mhm.
Lance, could you just put my contact information in that Google Doc that you send out, so that if anybody has any questions, they can just email me. Right now with stupid COVID, I am working from my dining room table, so I'm not in the office very much. But you can email me, and I would be more than happy to call you back and talk about this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah, I'll
cut
put it
you
on
off there, Cait. Go ahead.
No, that's totally fine. I'm awesome. And I mean, that's awesome that people can email you. That's super important. And I agree, it's hard to kind of give without like being on someone's land or in their garden to like, there's not really a one size fits all. The one thing I want to chime in about is from an organic practices standpoint, I use cover crops to manage invasives. That's something that is an ongoing like learning thing for me. But specifically, I am trying to get rid of dock, burdock, and poison hemlock in one area on my farm. And I've been really successful with winter rye. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited to continue to use that as a management technique, again, without using synthetic chemicals. Planting something that I can get to really outcompete and spread and cover my soil, get really good coverage, and then something that can be easily terminated, that's going to add organic matter back into the soil that then I can plant my crops into. So.
There was another question. Species that you would not plant yet, and how big should they be when you do plant them? That's something I cannot answer.
Again, I think a lot for me that is going out and walking. I live right by the Les Hills State Forest, so seeing what's going on, at least where I am at right now, I know a lot of the milkweeds are just kind of starting to come up, so that's not something I've planted out yet. But a lot of the, you know, echinacea, like I said, monardas, a lot of the grasses, those are still up right now. So yeah, so for sure, I would say in general, we're not expecting that we're going to get a hard frost. I think we kind of passed our last one, so most things are okay to go in. I'm trying to think. I have some ironweed that is just trying. It's really, really tiny still. And again, so I'm not going to put that out, I guess, for, you know, as long as your seedlings are like a couple inches, 1 to 2 inches, and then kind of take a look at their root ball or the root establishment. So this already has like really, really nice roots on it. That's totally safe to go ahead and put out. But yeah, the stuff that's still really little, I would give it some time if you have started seedlings at home.
All right, Lance, I think maybe we've exhausted our questions. You want to take us
Okay.
out?
Sounds good. Well, I don't have anything else, but thanks everybody for joining. And like I said, we'll send this document out to everybody who registered, and then I'll have the links to everything that was discussed.
Thanks
thanks for
everybody for
joining.
doing good things for prairies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Golden Hills, and thanks to Iowa Western also for inviting us.
Thanks all you guys. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, take care. Have a good night.